London's streets might shimmer with luxury boutiques and glass skyscrapers, but behind that glossy facade lies a truth most people never see. The city that's supposed to be one of the richest places on earth is actually hiding a poverty crisis that would shock you. Families are choosing between heating and eating. Children are going to school hungry. People with full-time jobs are sleeping in their cars. This isn't some distant problem in a faraway country. This is happening right now in one of the world's most expensive cities. And the numbers behind this crisis are even more disturbing than you might imagine. But here's what makes this story truly devastating. There's a specific reason why London's poverty is getting worse every single year. And it's connected to a policy change that happened just 5 years ago that almost nobody talks about. This one decision created a domino effect that's still crushing families today. And when you understand what actually happened, you'll see why things aren't getting better anytime soon. The evidence of what's really happening is hidden in plain sight, buried in reports that most people never read, and the reality is so much worse than the official statistics suggest. Walk through central London and you'll see tourists snapping photos of Buckingham Palace, while business people in expensive suits rush to meetings in Canary Wharf. The average house price in London hit £523,000 last year. That's about $660,000. Some neighborhoods have average prices over £2 million. You'd think everyone living here must be wealthy. You'd be completely wrong. More than 2 million Londoners live in poverty right now. That's 27% of everyone in the city. Think about that for a second. More than 1 in 4 people in London can't afford basic living standards. We're not talking about people who can't buy the latest iPhone or go on fancy vacations. We're talking about people who struggle to pay for food and rent at the same time. The poverty rate in London is actually higher than the average for the rest of England. The national poverty rate sits at around 22%. London beats that by 5 whole percentage points. This is the city where billionaires park their money in empty luxury apartments. This is where some of the world's biggest banks have their headquarters. This is where tourists spend billions every year. Yet poverty here is worse than in many parts of the country that don't have any of those advantages. Child poverty tells an even darker story. About 700,000 children in London live in poverty. It represents roughly 33% of all kids in the city. 1/3 of London's children are growing up poor. These aren't just statistics. These are real kids who go to bed hungry. Kids who don't have proper winter coats. Kids who miss school trips because their families can't afford the £5 fee. Kids who pretend they're not hungry at lunchtime because they're embarrassed about their free school meals. The explosion in food bank usage shows how desperate things have become. The Trussell Trust runs the UK's largest food bank network. In London alone, their food banks distributed over 350,000 emergency food parcels in just 1 year. That was a 25% increase from the year before. So these aren't occasional handouts. These are emergency food packages for people who literally have nothing to eat. And that's just one charity network. Dozens of other organizations and community groups run independent food banks across London. The real number of people depending on food charity is probably twice as high as the official figures. Teachers across London report that they are bringing in breakfast for their students because so many kids arrive at school with empty stomachs. Some schools have started keeping supplies of clean uniforms because children are coming in wearing dirty clothes day after day. Their families can't afford to run the washing machine because electricity costs too much. This is happening in 2024 in one of the richest cities on the planet. Housing costs are crushing Londoners in ways that people in other cities might find hard to believe. The average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in London is around £1,800 per month. It's roughly $2,300. For just 1 bedroom, the average full-time salary in London is about £2,500 per month after taxes. Do the math. Rent alone takes 72% of the average person's take-home pay. That leaves £700 for everything else. Food, transport, utilities, phone bills, clothes, medicine, everything. It's mathematically impossible for average earners to live decently in London without help. Many people share apartments with multiple roommates well into their 30s and 40s. Parents and adult children cram into tiny spaces meant for half as many people. 3 generations sometimes live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Privacy becomes a luxury nobody can afford. The working poor make up a huge chunk of London's poverty crisis. These aren't unemployed people. These are people with jobs. Full-time jobs. Sometimes multiple jobs. About 58% of people in poverty in London live in working families. Let that sink in. More than half the poor people in London have jobs. They work hard. They follow the rules. They do everything society tells them to do. And they still can't afford to live. Nurses, teachers, shop workers, delivery drivers, care workers, security guards. These are essential workers who keep the city running. Yet many of them are one unexpected bill away from complete financial disaster. A broken boiler, a stolen phone, a parking ticket. Any small emergency can push them over the edge. Some people work 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat. They work a day shift at one place, an evening shift somewhere else, then maybe drive for a delivery app on weekends. They barely see their families. They're exhausted all the time. They're still poor. The cost of living crisis that hit the UK starting in 2022 made everything dramatically worse. Energy bills doubled or even tripled for many families. Natural gas prices went crazy after Russia invaded Ukraine. The UK depends heavily on gas for heating and electricity. When global prices shot up, British households got hammered. The average energy bill jumped from about £1,200 per year to over £2,500. That's an increase of more than £1,300. For families already struggling to get by, this was catastrophic. Some people started rationing their heating. They'd only turn it on for a few hours a day, even in winter. Parents would heat just one room and have the whole family huddle there in the evenings. Some families stopped using their ovens because they cost too much to run, ate cold food or used microwaves instead. Elderly people faced impossible choices. Use the heating and skip meals, or stay cold and eat. Some chose to stay cold. Hypothermia cases increased among elderly Londoners during winter months. Food prices surged at the same time. Inflation hit 11% at its peak in late 2022. Some food items increased even more. Cooking oil prices doubled. Pasta and rice went up 30 to 40%. Fresh vegetables became significantly more expensive. Families who were just barely managing suddenly couldn't afford the same amount of food. They switched from fresh vegetables to cheaper processed foods. They bought less meat. They stretched meals further. Some started skipping meals entirely. Parents would feed their kids and tell them they'd already eaten, then go hungry themselves. Visit any London supermarket late at night, and you'll see people waiting for the reduced price stickers to go on food that is about to expire. There's actual competition for these yellow sticker bargains. People who work full-time jobs are fighting over discounted bread and dented cans. Transport costs add another massive burden. London has one of the most expensive public transport systems in the world. A monthly travel card for zones 1 through 6 costs about £260. That's over $300 just to be able to get to work. Many low-paid workers live in outer London zones because housing is cheaper there. But then they face brutal commutes and high transport costs. Some people walk for an hour or more each way to save money on transport. They leave home before sunrise and get back after dark. Their kids barely see them. Running a car in London is even more expensive. Insurance, fuel, parking, the congestion charge, road tax. It adds up to thousands per year. But many people have no choice. Shift workers who finish late at night when trains have stopped running, people who work in multiple locations, families in areas with poor public transport links. They need cars, but can barely afford to run them. The spatial inequality within London itself reveals deep divisions. Inner London boroughs like Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea have average incomes over £50,000 per year. Meanwhile, outer boroughs like Barking and Dagenham or Newham have average incomes under £30,000. These places are in the same city, but they might as well be different countries. In rich areas, you see organic grocery stores and artisan coffee shops and private members clubs. In poor areas, you see bedding shops and payday loan stores and boarded-up storefronts. The difference is stark and disturbing. Some of the poorest neighborhoods in the entire UK are in London. Tower Hamlets has pockets of extreme deprivation, despite being right next to the wealthy financial district. Kids growing up there can literally see the skyscrapers where billions of pounds change hands every day. But their own schools lack basic resources. Here's where that policy change from 5 years ago comes into play. In 2019, The government made significant changes to universal credit, the UK's main welfare program. They introduced a cap that limited the total amount of benefits any household could receive. They also maintained the freeze on benefit levels that had started back in 2016. These policies hit London particularly hard because housing costs here are so much higher than anywhere else. Universal credit includes housing support, but the local housing allowance rates don't come close to covering actual rents in most of London. The maximum housing allowance for a two-bedroom property in many London areas is around £1,200 to £1,400 per month. But actual rents are usually £1,800 to £2,000 or more. That gap has to come from somewhere. Families have to make up the difference from their other benefits or from earnings. This pushes them deeper into poverty. The benefit cap meant that families with children often couldn't receive enough support to cover both rent and food. They had to choose. Some families moved to cheaper areas far from their support networks, jobs, and kids' schools. Others stayed put and fell into debt and rent arrears. Evictions increased. Homelessness increased. The policy was supposed to encourage people to work more, but many families affected by the cap were already working. They just didn't earn enough to live in London without some help. The freeze on benefit levels meant that as inflation pushed prices up, the value of benefits went down. Benefits stayed the same in cash terms, but bought less and less food, less heating, less of everything. By the time the cost of living crisis hit in 2022, benefits were worth significantly less in real terms than they had been in 2016. Families who were barely coping suddenly couldn't cope at all. That's when food bank usage exploded. That's when child poverty rates jumped. Homelessness in London reached levels not seen in decades. The official count showed over 11,000 people sleeping rough or in temporary accommodation in London last year. But that number dramatically undercounts the real situation. It doesn't include people sofa surfing, staying with friends temporarily, or living in their cars. The real number is probably 3 or 4 times higher. Rough sleeping increased by 34% in London over the past 5 years. You see people sleeping in doorways, under bridges, in parks. Central London areas that used to have no visible homelessness now have tent encampments. The homeless population got younger too. More people in their 20s and 30s ended up on the streets. These aren't people with drug addictions or severe mental illness, though those people need help too. These are people who had jobs but lost them. People who fell behind on rent after an illness. People who escaped domestic violence and had nowhere to go. Young people who aged out of foster care with no family support. Temporary accommodation became a massive scandal. Local councils have a legal duty to house families with children who become homeless. But there aren't enough council houses or social housing units available, so councils put families in temporary accommodation. This usually means cheap hotels, hostels, or converted office buildings. Conditions are often terrible. Families of 4 or 5 live in a single room with a small bathroom. They share kitchen facilities with dozens of other families. They have no space for kids to do homework, no place to cook proper meals, no privacy or stability. Some families stay in temporary accommodation for years. Kids change schools multiple times as their families get moved around. Parents struggle to maintain jobs when they don't have stable housing. Cost to taxpayers is astronomical too. Councils pay commercial rates for these accommodations, often spending more per month than a decent apartment would cost. But they can't access regular rental properties because landlords won't rent to people on benefits. The whole system is broken and expensive and miserable for everyone, except the companies running the temporary accommodation who make huge profits. The impact on children's development and education is devastating. Teachers report that children from poor families are often behind their peers in reading and math skills. They come to school tired because their homes are overcrowded and noisy. They have trouble concentrating because they're hungry, and miss school more often because of housing instability or because they can't afford transport or because they do and have clean uniforms. Schools try to help, but they're overwhelmed. Teachers spend their own money buying supplies for students. They run breakfast clubs and after-school programs to give kids safe spaces and food. But schools can only do so much. Some schools in poor areas have mental health workers on staff full-time because so many children are dealing with trauma related to poverty, anxiety, depression, behavioral problems. Living in poverty is incredibly stressful for kids. They worry about their parents. They feel ashamed about their circumstances. They see other kids with things they can't have. This affects their mental health and their ability to learn. The health impacts of poverty in London are severe and getting worse. Poor people in London die younger than rich people. Life expectancy in the poorest London neighborhoods is about 7 years less than in the richest neighborhoods. 7 years. Same city. Completely different outcomes based on your postcode. Poverty causes chronic stress, which leads to all sorts of health problems. High blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, depression. Poor people are more likely to smoke and less likely to exercise, partly because stress and exhaustion make healthy choices harder. Access to healthcare is technically free through the NHS, but poor people still have worse health outcomes. They wait longer to see doctors because they can't take time off work. They can't afford prescriptions, which cost about £9 per item. They live in damp, moldy housing that causes respiratory problems. They eat worse food because healthy food costs more. Their children have higher rates of asthma, obesity, and dental problems. Mental health problems are incredibly common among poor Londoners. Depression and anxiety rates are much higher in deprived areas, but access to mental health treatment is limited. Waiting lists for counseling or therapy can be 6 months or longer. Private treatment costs hundreds of pounds that poor people don't have, so people suffer in silence. Some turn to alcohol or drugs to cope. Addiction rates are higher in poor communities. This creates another layer of problems. Jobs are lost, families break down, housing is lost. People end up in a downward spiral that's incredibly hard to escape. Support services exist, but they're underfunded and overwhelmed. There simply aren't enough resources to help everyone who needs it. The debt trap catches many poor Londoners. When you don't have enough money for basic living costs, you borrow. Credit cards, overdrafts, payday loans, borrowing from family and friends. The debt builds up. Interest and fees pile on. Before long, you're borrowing just to pay back previous borrowing. Payday loan companies target poor neighborhoods. They offer quick cash, but charge interest rates of 1,000% or more per year. People who borrow £200 can end up owing £500 just a few months later. When they can't pay, the debt gets sold to collection agencies. Bailiffs show up at homes. Court judgments are issued. This ruins credit ratings, making it even harder to access better forms of credit in the future. It's a vicious cycle. Some people use food banks because every penny of their income goes toward debt repayments. They work full-time, but have nothing left after paying creditors. Bankruptcy is the only escape, but that brings its own problems and stigma. The benefit system itself is incredibly complicated and punitive. Universal credit replaced 6 different benefits with one system. The idea was to simplify things. Instead, it created chaos. The application process is entirely online. People without computers or internet access struggle to apply. The system assumes everyone is digitally literate. They're not. Payments come monthly, but many poor people budget weekly or fortnightly. The monthly payments throw them off. There's a 5-week wait for the first payment when you first apply. 5 weeks with no income? People fall behind on rent immediately. They borrow money to survive, starting off in debt. The system is also designed to catch people making mistakes. If you miss an appointment, your benefits get sanctioned, meaning stopped for weeks or months. If you don't apply for enough jobs, sanctioned. If you turn down a job offer, even if it's unsuitable, sanctioned. Parents with young children get sanctioned. Disabled people get sanctioned. The sanctions push people into absolute destitution. Some people sanctioned have ended up in hospital from malnutrition. The cost of being poor creates a poverty premium. Poor people pay more for everything. They can't afford to buy in bulk, so they pay higher per unit prices. They can't afford energy-efficient appliances, so their utility bills are higher. They can't get bank accounts with good interest rates or low fees, so they pay more for banking. They use prepayment meters for gas and electricity, which charge higher rates than regular meters. They can't afford annual insurance payments, so they pay monthly and end up paying more overall. They buy cheap clothes and shoes that wear out quickly, so they have to replace them more often. They can't afford car repairs, so small problems become big expensive problems. Every aspect of life costs more when you're poor. It's expensive to be poor. That might sound like a contradiction, but it's absolutely true. Social isolation is another hidden cost of poverty. When you can't afford to go out, you stay home. When your friends suggest meeting for coffee or going to a movie, you make excuses. Eventually, they stop inviting you. Relationships suffer. Loneliness increases. This is especially hard on children. When their classmates have birthday parties at expensive venues, poor kids don't get invited because everyone knows they can't reciprocate. When school trips happen, poor kids stay behind. They feel different and excluded. Adults face isolation too. Workplace social events, drinks after work, team lunches. All these things cost money that poor people don't have, so they miss out on the social bonding and networking that helps people advance in their careers. Poverty doesn't just mean having less money. It means being cut off from normal social life. The pandemic made everything worse in ways that are still playing out. During lockdowns, many low-paid workers lost their jobs or had hours cut dramatically. The government support schemes helped some people, but they had gaps. Self-employed people fell through the cracks. People on 0-hours contracts struggled to prove their income. Meanwhile, wealthier people often kept their jobs because they could work from home. House prices went up because rich people wanted more space. Rents stayed high or increased in many areas. The wealth gap got bigger. Children from poor families missed out most on education during school closures. They didn't have computers for online learning, didn't have quiet spaces to study at home. They didn't have parents who could help with schoolwork because their parents were essential workers still going to work or were struggling with their own stress and problems. The learning loss for poor children was much greater than for wealthy children. This will affect their futures for years to come. Immigration adds another complex layer to London's poverty story. London has always been a city of immigrants. About 37% of London's population was born outside the UK. Many immigrants arrive with qualifications and skills but face barriers. Foreign qualifications often aren't recognized. Language barriers exist. Discrimination happens. Many immigrants end up in low-paid jobs regardless of their education. They work in care homes, restaurants, warehouses, cleaning. These are the jobs that keep London running, but they pay poverty wages. Some immigrants have uncertain status, making them vulnerable to exploitation. They can't access public services. They can't report abuse or wage theft. Employers know this and take advantage. Immigrants often live in the worst, most overcrowded housing. Multiple families sharing houses. 10 or 12 people in a 3-bedroom house paying rent for beds and shifts. One person sleeps while another works, then they switch. It's inhumane, but it's a reality for thousands of people in London right now. Brexit changed things significantly for European immigrants who used to have free movement rights. Many have left London. This created labor shortages in some sectors, but didn't improve wages or conditions as much as expected. The jobs are still low paid. Housing is still expensive. Now there are just fewer workers to exploit. The hostile environment and immigration policies of recent years made life harder for immigrants trying to establish themselves. Their landlords won't rent to people without perfect documentation. Employers worry about hiring anyone they're not sure about. This pushes vulnerable people further into the shadows where exploitation is easier. London's economy is weirdly distorted. It has extremely high-paying jobs in finance, tech, law, consulting. Then it has vast numbers of very low-paying jobs in services, retail, hospitality, care work. The middle is hollowed out. There aren't enough decent-paying jobs for ordinary people. High-paying jobs require specific skills and credentials that most people don't have. The pipeline to get those jobs through elite universities and internships is largely closed to poor kids. So intergenerational poverty perpetuates. Rich kids become rich adults. Poor kids struggle to escape poverty no matter how hard they work. Social mobility has stalled. The idea that anyone can make it if they just try hard enough is increasingly a myth. The data shows that where you end up in life is more dependent on where you started than at any time in recent decades. This is depressing and unfair and should make people angry. The political response has been inadequate at best. Austerity policies since 2010 cut funding for local services that poor people depend on. Libraries, youth centers, adult education, mental health services, social workers, all cut. Councils have had their budgets slashed. They struggle to provide even statutory services, let alone anything extra. The safety net has holes in it. Charities and community groups try to fill the gaps, but they're overwhelmed and underfunded themselves. Politicians talk about leveling up and helping struggling families, and they implement policies that make things worse. The benefit cap, the two-child limit on benefits, the bedroom tax, cuts to council funding. All these policies hit poor people hardest. Rich people don't notice. They don't use the services being cut. They don't claim benefits. They don't understand what life is like for people struggling. There's a massive disconnect between policymakers and the people their policies affect. London's poverty is a political choice, not an economic necessity. London generates enormous wealth. The city's economy is worth over £500 billion per year. There's enough money. It's just distributed incredibly unfairly. The richest 10% of Londoners own almost half of all the wealth. The poorest 50% own about 5%. That inequality is obscene. Solutions exist. Build more social housing. Raise the minimum wage to a true living wage that reflects London costs. Cap rents at affordable levels. Properly fund benefits so they cover actual living costs. Increase council budgets so they can provide services. Tax wealth more and income less. Regulate zero-hours contracts. Strengthen workers' rights. Invest in education and training. Provide free childcare. None of this is radical or impossible. Other countries do these things. The political will is lacking. Rich people don't want to pay more tax. Landlords don't want rent caps. Employers want to keep wages low. Politicians depend on donations from these groups, so nothing changes. The human cost of London's poverty is immeasurable. Every statistic represents a real person struggling. A parent who cries themselves to sleep worrying about money. Child who pretends they're not hungry. An elderly person sitting in the cold. A worker doing everything right but still sinking. These aren't failures of personal responsibility. These are failures of social policy. In one of the richest cities in human history, nobody should be going hungry. Nobody should be homeless. Nobody working full-time should be poor, yet here we are. The contrast between London's glittering wealth and its grinding poverty is stark. It should shame us all. The poverty is hidden from view for the most part. Rich people and tourists don't see it, see the nice bits. The poor bits are pushed to the edges, tucked away, made invisible. But they exist, and they're growing. 2 million Londoners in poverty, 700,000 children, thousands sleeping rough, hundreds of thousands using food banks. These numbers should be a national scandal. They should be the top priority for every politician. Instead, they're barely mentioned. Life goes on for those who are comfortable, while others suffer in silence. The future looks bleak unless things change dramatically. Rents keep rising, wages stagnate, benefits don't keep pace with inflation. More people will fall into poverty. More children will grow up poor. More families will face impossible choices. The social fabric of London is fraying. Communities are breaking down under the pressure. Trust is eroding. Resentment is building. This is dangerous. A city can't function when huge portions of its population are struggling this badly. Something will eventually break. Either politicians will wake up and implement real solutions, or things will get much worse. Protests, unrest, social breakdown. Nobody wants that, but we're heading in that direction if poverty keeps increasing. London doesn't have to be this way. The wealth is there. Solutions are known. What's missing is the political courage to challenge the interests that benefit from the status quo and put people first. Until that happens, millions of Londoners will continue to suffer needlessly in one of the world's richest cities. The shining towers and luxury shops will keep glittering, while people a few streets away choose between heating and eating. That's the reality of London right now, and it's getting worse every year.